I just want to go back to something I was talking about a while ago, which I just happened to mention in passing in a video I made earlier on today, which is to do with the relationship between the different disciplines and the language of the different scientific disciplines. What I was basically saying was that, you know, psychology and consciousness is kind of made out of psychology. Psychology is made out of biology. Biology is made out of chemistry. Chemistry is made out of physics, and maybe even physics being made out of maths. Although some people say physics is made out of consciousness, but I think that's, who knows. You know, I'm just trying to think through and analogize that, because one of the problems I have with a lot of the discussion to do with psychology, free will, consciousness, particularly when it's put right up against physics, other than as a metaphor, is it seems to miss out these intervening steps. And I do think those intervening steps may well be important. So I'm just trying to think of an analogy, and it's an analogy, analogy with cooking. You know what I mean? If you're making if you're making a cake, eating a cake, let's say you're tasting a cake. If you want to get to the experience of tasting a cake, you start out with the recipe. That's the first stage, and that involves reading, writing, lists, language, symbols, all that kind of stuff to do with this set of squiggles on a piece of paper. Recipe, then you go to kind of assembly, identification of ingredients, different process. Then you go to the processing of those ingredients, sifting, mixing, cooking, and then you go to the presentation of what comes out of that process to the taste buds. And it's only at that stage that the language of taste starts to become meaningful. So I think, you know, you can't go from the recipe to the taste. There's nothing in the recipe about the taste. You couldn't, well, unless you had, you know, lots of experience and were able to imaginatively move through those stages. There's nothing in the recipe itself which tells you what the taste is. And it's also a kind of difference in instrumentation, because I'm kind of thinking of the human sensorium as a series of instrumentations. You know, the kind of instrumentation that would be appropriate to dealing with a recipe, you know, the instrumentation of looking and reading and comprehending language and that kind of stuff, is very different to the instrumentation appropriate to, you know, the final product, which is taste. The instrumentation of taste is very different. The language of taste is different. The way that taste figures in a phenomenology is really, really different. So I don't think you can use the kind of system spec of the instrument of understanding recipes to talk about the system spec that represents the instrument of taste. You know, I think we're jumping from one piece of equipment to another. And so similarly, you know, the language of physics, the language of that kind of instrumentation of the world is probably not going to work terribly well when it's put up against the instrumentation of human experience, like the experience of having will, or the experience of being conscious more broadly. The recipe is not the meal. Yeah, I think that makes sense, kind of. There's my button. Can't find my button. There it is.